Welcome to episode 156 of the Brainy Business, understanding the psychology of why people buy. In today's episode, I'm very delighted to bring back Scott Miller of FranklinCovey. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. Today, I'm so excited to have Scott Miller back on the podcast to talk about marketing and branding, some of my favorite things. I really love the way Scott puts his books together, broken into 30 chapters with great, brain-friendly tips that you can begin implementing one day at a time. The thought is essentially that you can take a month and learn one lesson each day to uplevel in that particular area. As you'll hear more in the conversation, this is his second book in a planned series of 10, the first of which Scott discussed back in episode 69 of the podcast, Management Mess to Leadership Success. Today is about going from a marketing mess to a brand success, and the next in the series is job success to career success. You get the idea. 7 more in this awesomely effective series. You'll get to hear a lot more about Scott and his work during our conversation, so I'm not going to talk about it too much here. And before we get into that conversation, I want to be sure you know where to get the show notes. They're waiting for you within the app you're listening to or at thebrainybusiness.com/156. And they have links to all sorts of past episodes, ways for you to get in touch with Scott. And as you'll see, there are a lot of books mentioned throughout the episode. Scott is an EVP at FranklinCovey after all, and spends much of his work around books. Those are all linked for you easily within the show notes as well. Those already on the Brainy Business list got a direct link from me in the email you receive every Friday. Not on the list yet? Simply sign up for any freebie at thebrainybusiness.com and you'll be automatically added. The freebie for this episode is the first chapter of my book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You. And if you already have the book, in which case, thank you, you can also get the free PDF companion workbook. Both are housed in our free behavioral economics community called the Be Thoughtful Revolution. And there is a link to join that global community in the show notes as well. Now let's get to it. Scott Miller, welcome back to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Thank you for re-inviting me. Thank you for the platform and the spotlight. I appreciate your abundance.
Absolutely. I am always so happy to engage with you and to have conversations. I'm so excited about your new book. I talked about it when I was talking about my book. I did kind of a behind the scenes of my book and got to share about the kindness that you have provided to me in the world. So thank you again for that.
You and I share the same editor and the same publisher. I mean, how lucky of me to be in your orbit. But I love how I see our books matched up on Amazon. Buy yours and maybe buy mine. So right. Maybe one of your buyers will throw me a bone sometime.
Well, I think we've got some good bundling going on. Mine, I know that mine shows yours right in the space too. So I think very complimentary of the marketing brand space is where I'm at. We also share that same publication date, which is just kind of amazing on that. So
annoying that I had to compete with your buyers.
Right. I know we should have done a bundle of sorts to get them out there. So, tell, for anyone who hasn't heard the original interview where we talked about management mess to leadership success, tell a little bit about you and who you are, and then we'll talk about going from messy marketing to successful branding.
Yes. So I live in Salt Lake City with my wife and our 3 young sons. To my wife's horror, they all have my personality. They are 6, 9, and 11. So there's a lot going on. Yeah. And as we call it, Millerland. I'm a 25-year associate of the FranklinCovey Company. Of course, the people who brought you the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, was their chief marketing officer for almost a decade and served as their executive vice president of thought leadership. I, like you, host a podcast. It is now the world's largest weekly leadership podcast, goes to about 8 million each week, called On Leadership with Scott Miller. I host bookclub.com, the FranklinCovey book club for bookclub.com. And I write an article for Inc. magazine. I'm an author. And I've written numerous books. I have 8 books coming out in the next 4 years. This book that I'm talking about today is Marketing Mess to Brand Success. It's in a 10-year, 10-volume series in the Mess to Success brand. The first one was Management Mess to Leadership Success. The third one coming out in January will be Job Mess to Career Success. And then I have Communication Mess, Parenting Mess, Sales Mess, a whole bunch of messes, because after 30 years in a career, you can imagine I've got a few messes to share. So that's a bit about me.
I love it. So would you recommend to the world to write 10 books in 10 years or whatever you had said on that?
I would, if that makes sense for you.
Yeah.
I would. I mean, if you've got a brand in a series, I'm trying to build a brand sort of like the Chicken Soup for the Soul or the Badass series from Jen Sincero. And I think I'm slowly on my way with number 2. Number 3 is done. Number 4 is in the works right now. So I think it depends on if you have something to say, write a book. Don't let anybody tell you, oh, that book's been written. No, your book has not been written until you've written your book. And if you think you have something to share with someone else, write it. And don't listen to the challengers and the naysayers. Write your book, get feedback on it. But if your thing is $10 in 10 years like mine, awesome.
I love it. And this is from, like you said, coming from the FranklinCovey side of the world, from book people to be able to say that.
Well, I know a few things about books, maybe not how to sell them, but I know a lot about how to promote them. So,
well, that's great. That's all sorts of things in there. And I also, so the audience may know, so Stephen M.R. Covey did come onto the show as well, had a great conversation with him. So I know that is through this connection with you as well. So that was such a fun episode.
Basically, all things in the world either lead through you or me at this point. Right?
Yeah.
Let's just call it out.
Yeah, we're the crux of life. Welcome. It's not Kevin Bacon anymore. It's us.
Sorry, Kevin. Sorry. Melina's in the house.
Yeah. So let's talk about marketing messes, which totally into my jam of life, as we were talking about before. So give a little bit. I really like the way that you structure these books in your 10-part series of the kind of like 30 tips, 30 challenges that, things to be working on. So tell a little bit about that format of the book and why it's really great for people in business.
Well, so I like books that are short and breezy. I like books that are relatable. And so my books are not Good to Great or War and Peace, right? They're very practical. They're usually a bit horrifying in terms of, the things that I've shared in my career, but I'm very comfortable doing that. As a Catholic, confessing comes natural to me. So why not just productize that and monetize that, right? Did I just say I was monetizing my religion? I hope not. My books all follow the same format. You're right. They all have 30 challenges, 30 management challenges, 30 career challenges, 30 marketing challenges. And they're kind of meant to follow a 30-day calendar, where you could do it over 30 days or over 30 hours, because my chapters are intentionally very breezy and short. And so after, a nearly 10-year career as a chief marketing officer of a global public company, I decided to write a book about marketing and share 30 challenges. Not all of them were messes. Some of them were successes, but I just philosophically believe, Melina, that as a leader, when you own your mess, you make it safe for others to own theirs. You can teach through your messes. No one wants to hear about all your successes. They want to hear about your mistakes, because what they realize is, I could do that same thing. Let me walk around that metaphorical pothole, right? Don't do what he did. Don't say what he said. So these books in the Mess to Success series, of which, as you said, and I said, there'll be 10 over 10 years. They're not a gratuitous vomiting of all my mistakes, right? Sometimes I share successes. Sometimes I share messes I've seen other people make in their careers, usually nameless. I think hopefully always nameless. But that's the point, is that I believe there is enormous power in teaching through your messes, including my marketing messes.
Yeah. Well, I did an episode with Dr. Michelle Auerbach talking about the power of story, and that people need, there are chemicals that get released in the brain when we have benefits from hearing a story. We're able to relate more. You need that to be able to make a decision, to have that emotional connection to what's there. And so I think anytime when you're trying to really connect, and also having some vulnerability for yourself. Actually, John Levy, who I had on the show, whose book also came out on the same day as ours.
Gosh, number one. I mean, it crushed mine, right? Number one in audio, print, and in digital. Congratulations, John. I bought a copy. Yeah, he's blazing the trail for us.
Absolutely. I mean, such a great book, such a great premise. I love everything he's doing. And in his interview, we were talking about the pratfall effect, about how people actually find it endearing and like you more when you have a little stumble or a mistake, that vulnerability and benefit that comes from that. So along those lines, do you want to share whether it's a top mistake from the book or a story, a little anecdote that you really like the most?
I've got so many, right? I mean, most of these chapters are around a story that I share about a major marketing mess. I mean, maybe not a fiasco, right? But certainly a setback. One of them was, you mentioned Stephen M.R. Covey, of course, the son of our founder, Dr. Stephen R. Covey, who wrote the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. His son, Stephen M.R. Covey, wrote the seminal book on trust called The Speed of Trust. This book has sold almost 3 million copies, just barely above Melina's new release.
Yeah.
And mine put together times 12,
right.
by a factor of 20.
Yeah.
After 10 years.
We'll get there.
But his book is amazing. Anyway, as the chief marketing officer, my job was to, of course, promote Stephen Covey's book and his consulting, because he's an absolute gem and a beautiful man and a genius speaker, coach, advisor. So I decided to create a 30-city tour. And we put Steve in all these cities, and people come for a 2.5-hour event. And then if they love him, they hire him for a keynote speaker or for a implementation of FranklinCovey's trust solution. So I get this great idea. I'm going to send out video cards to about 1,000 CEOs across the country. Kind of like one of those Hallmark greeting cards where you open it up and it plays a song. Mm-hmm. Well, the technology exists now, as you know, where a credit card size video can appear. For not a lot of money, about $20 a card, which per card, it's a lot, but it's not a huge investment for a broad, multi-million-dollar campaign. Well, I decided to mail them out to several thousand leaders. Well, we actually had the salesperson deliver most of them. This is pre-pandemic, but we mailed one to a firearms manufacturer in the Northeast that was not a client. And it got flagged by the ATF, the FBI, the state police, the bomb squad, the local police department. They flagged it in the X-ray machine thinking it was a bomb. It was a video extolling the virtues of organizational trust and an invitation to come see Stephen M.R. Covey to teach you the 13 behaviors of high trust leaders. So, fortunately, some calm heads prevailed at this weapons manufacturer, firearms manufacturer. We got a call. I'm on the phone with our board of directors and our risk management committee, talking them down. Anyway, the point is, you can't control all the outcomes of a campaign. Hijinks and Hollywood stunts are really ill-advised. And so I share some lessons in there around, if you're going to make a video card, deliver it by hand. Don't put it through a scanner because it might get flagged for a bomb.
Yeah. So that is quite the enjoyable experience. I'm sure it's one of those things you can look back on and feel good about, that.
I wish I could have had the video of the bomb robot opening it up and it playing a video telling you about how to achieve organizational trust and how your leaders can be more trustworthy. They just did these 13 things.
It's great. The irony helps in the story for sure. I always have joked. So I was the person in marketing when I led the team at the financial institution, and just in general, you have these ideas for a cool, big thing that's different than what anyone else has done. And so one of my favorite campaigns that I did was for auto loans, and it was for refinancing the auto loans. And so thinking through this process and this was before I actually got my master's in behavioral economics, so I didn't know the terms of it, but now understanding the priming and how the brain associations work. So we found a car, and we had an artist actually cut it in half, and we put one half in one mall and one half in another mall before the holidays. And so it was this, and it had this whole big display built around it. And it was all that it's better to cut your payment than to cut your car, was sort of the joke, And so but it will hit your brain differently. You're going to stop. You could take pictures, you could sit in the car and take photos and all this, where it's half a car and kind of fun, do the step and repeat behind it and the whole thing. And it was all about this holiday shopping season and being good to go. And so the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, where my entire team is out. I was the only one in the office. And I had a call from one of the malls saying that a door had fallen off one of the cars because it's like welded back together after they cut it. And it was like front half and back half versus like down the middle.
I see.
So one of the doors fell off and they said they had it all like stanchioned off. And if you need to fix something in a mall, you need to bring someone in at like midnight, to come in after the mall has closed. And so I'm needing to find a welder last minute that can come in the day before Thanksgiving to try to weld a door onto this thing. And so they said too that, so some petrified rats, like a rat had fallen out from the inside of the car because it was this cool old car that had been in someone's barn for like 30 years. And they were like, we weren't sure if you wanted them. So we set them aside.
Well, that's where my rat went. I've been looking for her.
No. Like, I don't need the mummified rats can go. We're fine. And
you just described the majority of my career as a chief marketing officer. No rats and no nighttime welders, but very similar things in the consulting world.
Right. And so, but it's one of those you laugh it off. And where I did have someone on someone else that it's like, does anyone know a welder? What could we do right now? And for my team, having me reach out for things like that but I think that makes it kind of fun. And it could have been this big, like horrifying experience.
And on someone, right? Yeah.
Right. But even like we could have built it up as this horrible thing that happened versus a funny story that you can learn from.
So did it drive any business? Did you drive any business from it?
Of course we did. Yeah. It was a really great campaign. We got it fixed before the holiday season. Before that got kicked off, everything worked out well. So
good.
But again, funny things that you can laugh about and say like, yep, this is what I deal with. That's what we do. So I really like, and I of course made some notes about some of your lessons in here. But I think we start with the beginning. I feel like there's a reason number one is number one in the list of 30.
Yes.
So it's the customer, stupid.
Yeah.
What can you share about that?
Well, it sounds so harsh when you say it that way.
Stupid.
Yeah. So this is challenge one, right? It's the customer stupid. And when you read the book, and if any of your listeners buy the book, they'll understand. I actually premised it on the 1992 U.S. presidential election, where then Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton and Tennessee Senator Al Gore were running for the U.S. presidency and vice presidency against the incumbent George H.W. Bush and Vice President Quayle. And this is back in 1992. And of course, George H.W. Bush was coming off a 90+% approval rating from the success of the first Gulf War. And the political consultants, James Carville and Paul Begala, knew that the only way they could win was with the economy. So in the Little Rock, Arkansas campaign headquarters, there was this very famous sign called, "It's the economy, stupid." This was their point. And so I co-opted that phrase for this, with credit to them, to say, I think as marketers, we're often sucked into the whirlwind, the hairball that is our own EBITDA, our own P&L, our own quarterly profits, our own messaging, our own story. When that's where often the CEO, the COO, and the CFO live. But as a marketer, you have to resist that natural gravitational pull to be focused on all things about your company and be the voice of the customer. It's the customer stupid. And to be out talking with customers, listening to customers, making sure you know what are their needs, what are their problems, what is their exact circumstance they're in, and can you solve that? And are you calling things by the right names? I tell you, Melina, I heard once that the best salesperson isn't the person who's committed their third quarter revenue goal to memory. They've committed their client's third quarter revenue goal to memory, and they know what their client needs. So the first one was, it's the customer stupid, just to remind marketers that your role might be to be the voice of the customer and unnaturally, not disconnect, but separate yourself from all your company's needs and truly represent your client, the potential future clients.
Right. Well, I think it ties in so well too with what you have as challenge 9 of don't only do what you know and like best, right? So we can get tied in with our own jargon to put it into the behavioral science terms. Our system 2 is thinking it's talking to other logical brains and we know what people need and we understand the problem right off the bat. So we're just going to jump in and solve this for them. Our confirmation bias says that it's working. We're looking for details to back it all up. What more can you say about that challenge?
Yeah, I wrote this chapter because I think this is true for all of us and few of us admit it. And that is, I think we tend to market the way we like to be marketed to. We tend to market, if we're marketers, through the channels that we're most passionate about. If you love billboards, if you love UX design, if you love social media, if you love print, direct mail. And this chapter was just written about a lot of us gravitate, including me as a marketer, as a CMO, that I tended to deploy campaigns that I thought were cool, that I would relate to, that I enjoyed, that I found some validation in. That was fun. Wasn't always effective. And some people might think I'm an idiot, or some might think I'm just telling the truth or calling it out. Is just be mindful that don't always do what you like and know best, because it may not be the right vehicle. You might be obsessed with the power of the billboard at 7th and 9th, but your customers may not be driving there. They might be over on TikTok, or they might be, somewhere else. You get the point. It was just a reminder to be thoughtful of when your passions and when your excitement, your obsession might be clouding what the business needs, what the clients needs. In fact, most of my challenges aren't epiphanies, right? There's no genius in this book. In fact, most genius is just genius not applied, but reminded, right? So my chapters are all about good foundational marketing principles that I'm reminding salespeople and marketers to be aware of. In fact, Melina, I think over time, marketing mess to brand success will be a bigger hit in sales with salespeople and sales leaders than it will be with marketers. Because in some cases, I take marketing to task, and I'm happy to talk about that in the interview.
Yeah, well, I feel like we've made the segue, so go ahead.
Well, I forget exactly which one it is because I've written a lot of books, and here's one of them: is stay close to the cash. I think there are a number of marketers, Melina, that are creative, and they've come to marketing because they're scared of sales. Let me tell you, everybody's in sales and everybody's in marketing, whether you think you are or not. Mm-hmm. And so I want marketers to read this book and recognize that you cannot staple brand equity to the back of your bank deposit slip and fund payroll off of it. Now, brand equity is important. I get brand equity. I've been in marketing for a long time. But marketers need to be close to the cash. They need to make sure that what they're doing is driving revenue paying clients and cash is coming in the bank versus maybe hiding under likes or impressions or distribution. It's not enough to say, yeah, well, we posted the campaign. Sales didn't leverage it. No, I actually wrote this book so that we could lessen the vitriol and the divide between sales and marketing. No more finger pointing and no more blaming. Marketing needs to, in my opinion, generally be in service to sales. Even if that means you need to take a step back and report to sales to make sure that everything you do is in alignment with what sales needs. Now, yes, there are things that marketing does that are bigger than sales: reputation, thought leadership, branding. Those things aren't always immediate revenue generators. But I think a lot of marketers get caught up in those things and don't realize that their number one job, in my opinion, is to generate revenue paying clients.
Yeah. Well, I have said a lot, and I talk about this in my book, but the real thing that most businesses get wrong, just across all, whether they're trying to apply behavioral economics or they're not there yet or whatever, is you're trying to find the right answer to the wrong question. You're not solving the right problem. You didn't think through enough what the actual challenge is, what's the behavior you're trying to drive, and why. And so if you're working on the wrong thing, then it's a big waste. And so while it's even for, I know a lot of, the nonprofits or not-for-profits or whomever that are listening might be saying like, well, we're not about that bottom line. We're here for service. And so that's not what we're about. So this doesn't apply to me. What would you say to that?
Take your head out of the sand. You still have a cash flow statement, and you still have a balance sheet, and you still have a P&L, and you still need to go out and get funders, and you still need to make sure your message is out either raising money or securing your funding or repeating your grant or whatever it is. I mean, you still have a revenue stream.
Right.
Last time I checked. And you always will, right? I mean, everybody's either in business to make money or provide a service, including your non-for-profits, right? Provide a service. So I think these principles apply absolutely as relevant in the not-for-profit, GMO, you name it world. It's just, you got to maybe make some translations, what's right and what's off for you. But generally the principles are the same. Is you need to make sure that your campaigns are effective at driving awareness or interest or customers or donors or benefactors or whatever it is. Those principles are universal.
Well, in many ways, because there's that fiduciary responsibility for the donors that are creating the space for you, there's even more need to ensure that the things that you do are really effective and efficient.
Well said. Yeah.
So what would be something that I think there were a couple of pieces I really liked also where you talk about in defining the charter, knowing what your charter is. You talk about this, am I working on facts or feelings, which is so behavioral science space, right? So is this system 1, system 2, where am I coming from? Can you expand a little on what you talk about in that space and how that works?
I've been really humbled. I had the privilege of interviewing Dr. Susan David, right? The Harvard Medical School psychologist, wrote a seminal book called Emotional Agility. Has a massive TED Talk. I actually saw her at the World Business Forum in New York. I interviewed her. First of all, she's South African, so her accent is intoxicating, and she's easy on the eyes, and she has an MD or a PhD and all the things, right? And she wrote a fantastic book about the power of emotional agility. And perhaps I should be horrified, but at age 50 was when I interviewed her, that I started to realize there's a massive difference between facts and your feelings, emotions, and opinions. Duh. But like all husbands and parents, we tend to conflate, and humans, we tend to conflate how we're feeling about something with what the data says. And I think the best leaders, the best marketers, the best parents and spouses are able to understand they both have a place, right? My feelings are important. My opinions are important. My emotions are important. But it's when I displace facts with my opinions and feelings is when I get in trouble. I write a lot about it in many of my books about the power of differentiating between the two. I don't know about you, but I'll come home after work in the car and I'll role play an argument I plan to have with my wife. I'll role play it in the car. I'll say this and then I'll be her and she'll say that and I'll counter with this. And by the time I pull up in the driveway, not only have I finished the argument, she's lost and she hasn't even started yet, right? And so I share this story in the book about how important it is to value both, but recognize facts are facts and feelings are feelings, and don't conflate the two, especially as marketers. Have you done your research? Do you know what circumstance your client is in, or are you guessing? I have a great story. Can I share a story?
Please.
So there was a company called iRobot, and many years ago, they actually launched this thing we now know as the Roomba.
Yeah.
Which they were originally naming it the I Suck, believe it or not. And the Roomba, of course, is a very expensive but fantastic self-vacuuming disc that goes around your house. And now there are more than just one. But iRobot was testing what was then called I Suck, which is now fortunately called Roomba. And after they launched it, they were getting a remarkably high number of them returned because the motors were burning out. Like nothing in correlation to what they had experienced during their whole QA testing. They were like scratching their heads. Well, the more that they delved into this, what they realized was a surprising number of early purchasers of Roomba were actually heart patients. People that had just gone in for double bypass surgery or an aortic valve replacement or something like that. And when they were sent home, they were told, A, no strenuous exercise. You may not vacuum because apparently vacuuming is tough on the rib cage and the heart. And so what happened is these people were homebound. And so because they wanted to have guests come visit them, they wanted their house clean. They were running their Roombas 3 and 4 times a day, like triple the recommended average. They wanted to have clean houses, but they also wanted companionship. Something like 90% of Roomba owners have named their Roomba. My mother has. She named hers Betty. So the point is, I don't know what Roomba and iRobot could have done differently other than just really be thoughtful around who is our client? Who is it going to be first? Who might it be second? What is their circumstance? And not trying to guess what they think it was. I don't mean to disparage them at all. Hindsight is 20/20, but it's good advice to say what you think might be the facts, might just be your own preferences. Like you say, your confirmation bias is creeping in because you're so passionate about your idea where your ego won't let you prove it wrong. I interviewed Karen Dillon, Melina. She's the former editor of the Harvard Business Review. And she's also the author of many books, including the book, How Will You Measure Your Life? Co-authored by Clayton Christensen, the late Harvard professor who passed a year ago, the great innovator Clayton Christensen. In their book, How Will You Measure Your Life? They shared a Harvard Business School research study from another person that said that 93% of successful organizations that achieved, destined success, 93% of organizations achieve success with an emergent strategy, not their deliberate strategy. Meaning the strategy they set out with is not the one 93% of the time that achieved success for them. They had to pivot on a dime. They had to change their mind. They had to search and look for new opportunities. Only 7% of the time was it the original idea. I think this is haunting advice for entrepreneurs and for leaders to be really aware of when your ego is getting involved, getting in the way of clarifying your strategy and your marketing plans and your investments and your confirmation and your unconscious biases, because we all have them and they can be detrimental if we're not self-aware or have somebody else appointed to point out when they're actually getting in the way.
Right. And just being willing to listen to those. I think that really ties back with what you were talking about earlier with you're not your ideal customer. If you were the customer, you wouldn't have been able to create the thing that you made. And so the way that you talk about it and think about it is just not the way that they do. They don't know what you know. And so you have to understand what are people asking? What's the question? What's the problem they're trying to solve? What keeps them up at night?
Yes.
And then work that in.
What's their circumstance?
Yeah.
How many times have I been in a meeting where I was the lead marketer where I would say, well, if I was buying this, what someone should have said is, you mean back when you were the chief human resource officer of a technology company? Well, I was never the chief human resource officer of the technology company buying this for my people, right? And by the way, what you're calling it isn't what I'm calling it. I have a great chapter around, speaking their language. I share a story about how we hired a new marketer that came in and I was using all these crazy words. She's like, what are those words? No one calls it that. What is this word stewardship? Are we in church? No one calls their job their stewardship. And I kind of wanted to punch her. Fact of the matter was, she was totally right. I had been so inculcated in the FranklinCovey vernacular. I'd spent too much time in the chairman's office. I should have spent more time in our client's office.
Right. Yeah. The way that we think and talk about things, and even super simple stuff, going back to when I worked in the financial institution, I have a lot of financial institution clients, even simple things like APR and APY. Like you can't assume that people know what that means.
Right.
And it's not going to resonate with the brain.
It's so simple, right? I mean, what I might call leadership, you might call productivity. What I call culture, you might call engagement. And so the more you're out with your clients, listening to your clients, and to quote you, their job to be done, their circumstance, the more you can make sure your messaging, your marketing, your brand is resonating. Donald Miller, the great marketer, right? I was interviewing him. He talked about how the biggest messaging mistake people make is that they tell their story. They don't tell a story that their client can find themselves in. No one cares why your grandfather developed the business. No one cares how much money you spent on R&D last year. No one cares that you open an office in Taipei. What they care about is are you describing a solution to a problem they have, and can they see themselves clearly being a client of yours?
Yeah. Getting back to that power of story. And I just saw a commercial. I don't know how long it would have been out. I don't see that many commercials these days in the grand scheme of things. But I remember it was for one of the new Google phones, like the Pixel or something. I don't know. But so it was a guy that he was saying, this is the first time. So he is deaf. And it was the first time I saw
this with the parents and the grandchild. I saw it last night. Yes.
Right. So we must have been watching the same thing, or we were both watching
an Asian couple, right? Or
No, mine was a man, and it was the first time he was ever able to have a conversation with his son. He was ever able to talk to his son on the phone. And even though he said he has a hearing aid, so maybe he's not deaf, but he's very hard of hearing. And so it was the first time in, he's 55 and his son is 24 or something. And this is the first time I've ever been able to talk to my son on the phone. And you just go, Like, what an amazing, relatable story. That's not my circumstance, but I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you can bring that together.
I saw the same commercial last night for the same phone, but it was an elderly Asian couple that both were hearing impaired. And they were communicating with their son and his wife and their grandson for the first time. And it was just riveting. Clearly, there is a circumstance that company has found they have a solution for. Not your or mine, but like here we are talking about it 2 days later. Different commercials, same message. And you and I were talking about it.
Right. And it's something that, even though that's not a fit for me, because the story resonates, and I appreciate that they've created that for this environment. And if it's enough that they can have a conversation, of course I'll have a good conversation on the phone, right? There are all these associations that come up with it. Really smart branding and marketing, to be sure. I want to make sure we can touch on one of the things I think is so important you talk about is to not forget you have two buyers.
I have been on lots of podcasts on this book, and you are the first host that has picked that one to talk about. As I love this chapter. Let me tell you, the people who read and buy this book are telling me it's as much a leadership book as it is a marketing book. I actually think it's a career book. I think I shared some really good career stories in this book. This one is about never forget you have two buyers. You have an internal buyer and you have an external buyer. And as a marketer, you recognize that you've got to have a constituency inside your company that is championing your initiatives and your campaigns, because there could be a low-level financial analyst who sinks your project, or it could be someone that's peacocking in front of their peers in a sales meeting, and they're just, kind of, quote, toying with marketing because they got some axe to grind. Woe is the marketing leader that forgets you have a constituency inside your firm and one outside. They don't always tack at the same speed. A lot of time, your salespeople might tire on a message and get restless when the market has barely even adopted it yet, right? And there's a lot more potential customers than there are salespeople in your company. So I've learned a lot to kind of fine-tune my hearing, but also fine-tune my message and sequence it. I teach some great strategic career skills in that chapter. Don't forget you have two buyers, around how to make sure you build consensus by dividing and conquering. I never pitch an idea, a marketing idea, with 7 sales leaders in the same room, because they're like piranhas. Talk about cancel culture. They'll go after you just because they're bored or their lunch is late. You always pick them off one by one so they can peacock individually. And then you bring them together when they've already kind of, diffused any anger or frustration or peacocking that there is. And now they're on your side and they're kind of fine tuning it. There's some great career advice from a guy who's had a 30-year, corporate America career. I'd forgotten about that story, but I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah. I mean, that's, for me, that really is, whenever I have done, consulting for marketing, or when I was talking about the importance of marketing and what it is that we do in marketing, and the difference between marketing and branding. For me, the way I have always said this is, marketing is very reactive, in that someone asked for an advertisement, someone wants this sponsorship, we need to create this thing. You're very like one-off, doing things as they come up and not looking out into the future or really looking at what you've done in the past. Branding is this touchstone, this piece you're able to come back to. You have a bigger plan. You know what you're about. When someone asks for something, you can say, yes, this is part of our brand strategy. It fits. Or no, that's not a part of our culture. We're not about that, which is why branding is so proactive, but it makes every conversation and piece that comes up along the way, those requests are very easy to address because it all either fits within the brand or it's not part of your brand. And then that's okay.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Thank you. Thank you. Like I said, I've said it a few times. So for you, I love, again, that it goes from marketing to brand, because I use that same comparison point. So what does that really mean in the nutshell piece, knowing there's the whole book about it that people will, of course, pick up to learn all those tips. But what's the real difference and importance for you between marketing and transitioning to branding?
Well, I think you said it beautifully. I could offer maybe even a different perspective, not a challenging one, just a different one. I kind of got tired of marketers talking about brand, because although I greatly value brand and how you create one and how long it takes to build one and how quickly you can destroy one, including your own, because everybody has a brand, sometimes accidentally, sometimes created deliberately. I wanted to have a bit of a call to action to say, you got to build a brand. You kind of earn a brand. And you earn a brand often with some of the outcomes of your marketing efforts and your advertising efforts. I know many marketing campaigns that are proactive. I know many that are reactive. I know many that are in the quarter for the quarter, right? Or that are long-term. But I think there's both. You need to have a strong marketing strategy and advertising strategy and public relations strategy that helps you build revenue and a brand over time. At the end of the day, your brand is just, did you make and keep a promise? Did you make and keep a commitment in terms of how your toothpaste works, in terms of, how this wine will taste, whether or not my flight experience will be like you say it is. So brands are hard to build. We talk a lot about brand and brand equity, and I kind of got sick of these sort of younger marketers coming in and just schooling me on brand equity. And I'm just looking at them thinking, how many successful marketing campaigns have you run where you spent 50 grand and you made 500 grand and it delivered 300 grand in EBITDA? And can you even tell me what EBITDA is? Because you're never going to survive in marketing if you can't read a P&L, right? So I think your point is well taken, is that they're symbiotic. One leads to another. One supports another. They're different. And how you go about them is very different as well, too.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes ever, and it's one that I had to make sure made it into my book. It's very early on. It's by Peter Steidl from his book, Neurobranding. And he says, a brand is a memory, which when we look at the brain association, all the compilation of what has happened, it's so important.
Can I validate that?
Yeah.
A brand is a memory. Can I tell you, I'm 53 years old. I've been fairly successful in my life, lots of setbacks. I've had some good financial success. I have 3 sons, and they go to private school, so they're in uniforms during the day. But every hour after that, I dress them in Ralph Lauren, like polos, with the pony. Because I'm from the East Coast, and I was a prep on the East Coast in the 80s. When I was raised in a middle-class family, we didn't have Ralph Lauren. You got like once a year. My mom would go to Marshall's, and she might find one on sale, and that was your birthday gift. And there was a girl in my school, I won't mention her name, but she had like every color of the frickin' Ralph Lauren rainbow. Every day she wore a different Ralph Lauren shirt. I had one that I cycled in like every 4 days. And for me, it sounds so preposterous, but like the pinnacle of success was being able to have all the Ralph Lauren polo shirts in purple and green and black and red and white. And so here I am 35 years later with this memory, right, of grounded that class, sophistication. A gentleman wears a Ralph Lauren short sleeve polo pony. And so here I am 35 years later dressing and they're too young to know the difference. They're fine. They don't care. As long as they got their pixie stick and their Slurpee or whatever it is, they're happy, right? I'm not feeding my kids pixie slips and too often Slurpee. You get the point, right? This memory, this branding memory is inculcated in me on the life I want to live through Ralph Lauren, whose real name, by the way, is Ralph Lipschitz, right? He's this genius designer Jewish man that built this huge WASP level, billionaire campaign. I think he's one of the most successful, enduring designers in all of our American history. Because I had this memory of like 8th grade, right? And I'm still trying to pursue it. I need a therapist, Melina.
Well, there's so much in that nostalgia and that we build who and what we are at that age. And so many people wouldn't be able to tie it back to that moment, for you where that you were looking around and that mattered to you. But we have that with so many other brands, like you mentioned toothpaste and the cars that we like, or it's all of it.
Totally. I'm driving the cars that I think the successful people when I was in my teens and 20s were driving, because that's the brand that I want to have for myself. It's so lame, but true and enduring.
Yeah, but important to know as we transition from marketing mess to brand success for all the businesses out there to learn that lesson. So
you've been listening to an hour of therapy with Dr. Melina Palmer and her most recent patient, Scott Miller.
Indeed. Thank you. So as we wrap up, for everyone who wants to find you and all the books, because by the time we're listening, who knows, these are evergreen. So there will be other books by that time. What's the best way to reach out to learn more? All of that.
Sure. Well, you can visit me at scottjeffreymiller.com. All of my blogs, podcasts, books are all there. You can buy my books anywhere books are sold. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore, Walmart, Target, you name it. And I'd love to have you connect and follow me and friend me on any social platform. I'm on every one almost that exists. So if you Google Scott Jeffrey Miller, my crazy mug is bound to show up.
Absolutely. And we will link to it in the show notes for everyone. Thank you so much again, Scott, for joining me on the show. As always, a very big delight to chat with you.
Thank you. And congrats on the success of your own book. I look forward to buying it and reviewing it and reading it myself.
Oh, thank you, Scott. Appreciate you. Thank you again to Scott Miller for joining me on the show today. What got your mind buzzing in today's conversation? I always love talking with Scott. He's a burst of energy, passion, and excitement that I can't help but find infectious. I also love his ability to boil down a topic into 30 actionable stories and steps. And as mentioned at the top of the show, he's a wealth of information on great books and experts in all sorts of fields, from the On Leadership podcast, his other work with Franklin Covey and their book club. So much amazing knowledge. As you heard, there were quite a few books mentioned on the episode today. And if you found yourself scrambling to take notes on them all, never fear. They're linked for you in the show notes, along with links to past episodes, where to find Scott, and all sorts of other goodness. Find it all at thebrainybusiness.com/156. And as we close out the show, I want to thank everyone from around the world who's ordered my book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You, and for sharing about it on social media and tagging me and writing reviews. If you haven't yet, would you consider leaving a review of the book on Amazon, Goodreads, or wherever else you write reviews? It can help others to find the book and see that it's a fit for them, and it would be so appreciated by me. Thank you in advance for taking the time. I hope you're loving the book. And if you haven't yet checked out that free PDF companion workbook, all 111 pages of it are waiting for you inside our free global community, the Be Thoughtful Revolution. Links for all in the show notes, which once again are at thebrainybusiness.com/156. And thank you again to Scott Miller for joining me on the show today. It was a delight to chat with and learn from you once again. Next week on episode 157, I am so excited to announce that Dr. Robert Cialdini is joining me on the show to talk about his newly expanded book, Influence. It's going to be a lot of insightful fun. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.